Hi, this is Heather Box from the Million Person Project. And the Million Person Project is a global project about love, storytelling, and connecting change makers. And I am here today with someone that I've known for a very long time, Cary Fukunaga. And Cary Fukunaga is a writer and director. And most recently, he has directed Beast of No Nation and the first season of True Detective. And we are here today to talk about the power of stories. So, hi, Cary.
Hey there.
Thank you so much for joining us. So I'd love to hear about why you're a storyteller. Why did you get into the field of storytelling?
God, I don't know if I have like a one answer for that. I started writing, I think when I was in 5th grade or 6th grade, just for fun, not part of school, making up stories and putting them down, and started participating in sort of like fictional writing contests and things like that. I think when I was 14, I wrote my first long form story, which is a 60-page sort of Civil War love story. And then I enjoyed it. I wasn't really like a big academic. I wasn't really a big jock. I just sort of, played whatever sports that were interesting to me. But I think sort of my real escape was those bits of writing I did when I was younger, the storytelling.
Something that I've noticed about your work, that I'm sure a lot of people have noticed about your work, is that it's dealing with the parts of humanity, of ourselves, that a lot of times we don't see on TV. So it's a lot of like the darker undercurrents of us. Is there a reason why that's something that you explore, or is that something you explore?
Yeah, I suppose if you've just seen my movies, you'd think I'm a pretty dark person. I mean, you've seen Nombre to True Detective, and obviously the content in the child soldier story, Beast of No Nation. But I don't know if it's always been sort of the goal to tell those darker sides of our conscience, or our sort of, that duality between, what we aim to be in life and sort of our weaknesses that sort of make us sort of more complex human beings. Also, just in terms of subject matter, like whether it's about gangs or child soldiers, I sort of stumble upon these stories, and it's not really like a conscious sort of like choice. Like, but child soldiers, I learned about them first when I was an undergrad at Santa Cruz. Learned about the blood diamonds and sort of any sort of resource wars that are taking place around the world, and the image of a child soldier just stuck with me. I think it's the same thing actually with Sin Nombre, because when I first heard about the Central American immigrants riding the trains across Mexico, it was the image of all these people on top of a train. So that's sort of like why I gravitated to those stories. There's probably also like a psychological level that I haven't fully explored yet. And sometimes I feel like it's better not to overanalyze those things, because there's a magic that happens when you don't understand your motivations. So it's sort of like it's a willful ignorance.
Mm. And so what do you get out of making the films? What do you hope the impact is on people, and what is the impact on you?
Starting from those initial images, there's definitely some sort of an emotional component to that. There's a feeling of sometimes disbelief, the incongruity, for example, of a child holding a weapon. And then as you do the research and you find out what's really taking place, it's definitely a powerful experience. You start to see the world through those folks' eyes. And then you want to start crafting a story to introduce to people who don't know that world, that will hopefully not only make people aware of something as a sort of side, bonus to the storytelling, but also to feel something outside of their normal everyday experience, and to feel connected to people that they wouldn't normally feel connected to feel connected to a kid across the world, or even a kid just south of our own border who's, what he wants out of life is not so different from us. And the troubles he faces are obviously far more extreme, or far more dangerous, but not necessarily in terms of a human being any different from the rest of us.
For me, what was really interesting about Beast of No Nation, the Million Person Project is a global project. And one of our first trips abroad, we were in northern Uganda, and we did a workshop with a group of 6 child soldiers and 6 kids who had been in the camp in the town that these kids were reintegrating to. And so the group of former child soldiers were starting a peace and reconciliation group. they wanted to figure out how to be able to tell their own story. So for Jimmy, who was one of the people in the workshops, what he expressed was that his story was complicated to tell because he believed himself to be both the victim and the perpetrator. And that a lot of the energy around the child soldier conversation was like, oh my God, poor you, poor you. And he was kind of having a hard time receiving that energy because he was like, yeah, poor me. But then I became a really high up in this military and I was a child soldier, but then I also was the perpetrator. And that was something that I felt in Beasts of No Nation that you conveyed in such a moving way, like with the commander. You can't stand him. You can't believe he's doing that. But then the whole way through, it's like, how do I still feel for this guy? You know, I still felt sympathy for him. He was likable. And so what goes into that for you?
Well, for one, like when I read stories where the villains are just pure villains, to me, I stop believing it because everyone has a rationale for what they're doing. One of the greatest villains of the 20th century is Hitler. And if you really look into the psychology of Hitler, I'm not by no means defending him, but in his own mind, he was not an evil person. And to many people, he was a hero. So sometimes the tricky thing about history is figuring out that it's much easier to look at the world as a black and white entity and that good people do good things and bad people only do bad things. And we can just put everyone in their box and not worry about ourselves because we'll always put ourselves in the good box. And the things that make us upset are things that emotionally disturb us or create turmoil. And in terms of like my storytelling too, like I do want to disturb people because I want to disturb this idea that that we are all in this good box because we're not. And there's a part of us who talked about the darkness. There's a part of us absolutely that could be Idris. There's a part of us absolutely that in a situation we could look at a series of choices, give us 6 steps of yes and no answers that might lead us to the point of having to perpetrate things in this controlled, civilized world we live in right now we would never imagine doing. Mm-hmm. Start with like not having food and you gotta give food to your child, and then start seeing your child suffer, right? And your neighbor has food and they won't share, and you're watching your child die. What do you do? Mm-hmm. Right? You start asking yourself those kind of questions, and very quickly you can descend via rationale into a place where you no longer are that person you start out. And that's true human nature. And I think it's always disturbing to look at that in the face and to see, especially in places of war or conflict, how quickly that falls apart. Mm-hmm. The facade, I suppose, of control. So, and that goes for Agu, the character Agu as well. He becomes the perpetrator of violence as well. And that last scene where he's talking to that therapist is all about saying, I know what I am now. Mm-hmm. You look at me like a beast, and that's what I am. I'm a monster. But at one time I had a mother and a father, and they loved me. Mm-hmm. And it's an awareness not of where he's coming from, but where he is now and where he has to go still. And it's complicated. It's not neat. It's not buttoned up. For the people who want like a clean story that make them feel good about themselves when it's done, I'm not going to make those kind of stories for them. I'd much rather disturb people. It's
a subject matter that I am really interested in. And I feel like in the world that I live in right now, it's the artists and like the mystics and the spiritual people that are willing to talk about this, that are even willing to even broach the conversation of, is Joseph Kony evil or not? Or is Hitler evil or not? And does that even exist? What is that paradigm that we set up? To me, that is something deeply worth exploring. And I think the way that your art does that helps us to engage in it in an entertainment type way. But the conversations are really huge spiritual questions. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I've known about you since I went to high school with you for a long time is that you are a real...
In 8th grade, though, when I was a senior.
That's true. You were my sister's friend, but you and her did math and together, and you were like her math tutor, or she was yours or something.
If you ask her, she'll say I copied from her.
Oh, well, these are the things I understood about you as an 8th grader. You were a really weird history buff who was really into civil rights reenactments,
Civil War reenactments.
I'm sorry, Civil War reenactments. Yeah, sorry. And
But I
then
would love to do the Million Man March.
that would be a good reenactment. And then secondly, I knew that you were like kind of a pro snowboarder or something almost. At least that's what it felt like from an eighth grader's perspective. To me, it wasn't surprising at all when I watched Sin Nombre, which is this really harrowing story of people crossing the border on trains from Mexico to the US. To me, it was in some ways a war reenactment story. And then when I saw Beasts of No Nation, obviously, I was like, so he's still doing war reenactments, just, with actors and.
So I'm waiting to do it on the big scale. Like I want to shoot like Napoleonic scale warfare.
What is your attraction to war?
Probably the testosterone driven sort of mind of a little boy. I don't know. It's funny looking back at that time period. I mean, for me, you were this girl that had a wild collection of hats. Yeah. Including a Dr. Seuss hat you'd wear all the time. Also, which I think you wore when you did the high school tour. I think you were wearing your Dr. Seuss hat.
I did. Like I was,
I remember
eccentric.
And that's probably why I felt comfortable talking to you about my dress up hobbies, which not everyone in high school knew about. But I think there's something about for me at least, when I was that age, especially, I thought I was born in the wrong era. And I think I also thought at some point I was Black as well. I think when I was 14, I went through a hardcore Malcolm X, Alex Haley novel sort of phase, and just felt like, I think I always felt outside of my own experience. And that also made me feel more driven to learn about other people's cultures and languages and countries and histories, and figure out like how we all got where we are and where are we all headed. I loved the idea of context, and I think history provided that. And it gives me a pretty interesting broad stroke sense, not only of like, the world as a whole, but also individuals and sociology and psychology and how that plays out. And I like that. I like looking at things from that perspective. I think it fed well into being a writer-director, at least in the observation aspect of it all. And in terms of war, I think I'm still interested in war. I think we're always at war. It's a part of our DNA, and when we're not at war, it manifests itself in different means, through politics, through sports and exploration, through different forms of ambition, but it's always there. I think we're a pretty violent species, and there's a place we need to head to, obviously a more heightened place we need to head to if we're ever going to survive as a species. It's got us to where we are, but obviously there's a change that needs to happen if we're going to ever leave this planet and expand beyond this solar system. I mean, not to get sci-fi, I'm just saying like this is kind of for our own survival that needs to happen. I think if we don't explore war and that's part of ourselves, and we're not really truly looking at ourselves in a pure way.
It's not the orientation that I have towards the world. So it's a really important invitation for me, and I'm sure for a lot of viewers, to think about human nature in that perspective. What would your advice be to your 15-year-old self?
Like in terms of like doing anything different?
Just what would you tell him if you could go back and talk to him?
Drive slower. I feel pretty happy with the choices I made. I mean, I made a lot of mistakes, but I also am happy about the mistakes I made too. Maybe I would have started a little earlier with foreign languages, which I didn't really, I spoke a little bit of Spanish when I was younger, but it wasn't until I was 18 that I learned French. And now I wish I had started another language earlier. So right now I speak like 3 languages fluently and a couple piecemeal. I wish I spoke more, because I think one of the greatest gifts or opportunities I've had is to travel and to live abroad for long periods of time. And through speaking foreign languages, I've had conversations with people that I would never have been able to have had I had not spoken French or Spanish. French, especially like when I was in Indochina and also in West Africa and in Haiti, has allowed me to speak to people that you would never guess that would still speak French. In Cambodia and Vietnam, where like, the colonial, anyone who was bilingual was essentially liquidated. During Pol Pot's regime, there were still people out there that spoke French. I didn't speak Khmer, but I was able to speak to them because they spoke French.
Yeah. We do so much work abroad, but usually it's with people who speak English, or like what we do in our workshops is have someone that speaks the native language and someone who speaks English, and they sit by each other and they sort of like translate for each other. but there's such a barrier sometimes when I'm like, hey, I want to support you in this process, but I have to like look at your friend. And obviously the content of our workshops are so personal that you want to be able to look someone in the eyes and talk to them about their story. And that barrier is so big. So I wish that for myself too.
And I think the most warming part of those connections is that you may never be a friend with that person, or you wouldn't necessarily choose to like make them your best friend or your companion in any long period of time. But there's a instinct also in humans to connect, whether it's like a guy squatting on the street in Hanoi or something that shares like his boiled pigeon egg with you, and you're like sharing some like local beer or whatever, and like having a moment. This person is just curious. They want to know about you. And like you could go to any country that right now, say America feels as an enemy, or as a potential enemy, whether they're villainizing, the Russians or the Iranians. You go there and any sort of like American off the street, any Persian off the street, put them together, the initial instinct will probably be just to connect. And like, who are you? What are you about? What do you like? And there's this warmth that takes place when that connection happens. And it's just like so many conflicts of the world would be sort of eliminated by just more human contact on that level. Mm-hmm. Seeing how much more alike we are than how different we are.
I agree. And it brings me to my final question for you, which is you do go to places that the people who watch your movies will likely never go. And your perspective is influencing your viewers in such a way. And so what do you feel like when you think about that? What do you feel like your responsibility is?
I don't want to be overly politically correct. For one, being from the Bay Area, there's like almost the point of fascist sort of political correctness that I'm aware of, having grown up with it. And, I'm sure I've got a lot of criticism in my films for whatever, portraying Africa as another place in conflict or whatever it is that I do wrong, But it's like my most important thing when I'm there is how do I make it as authentic as possible, especially being an outsider. And whether in Ghana, for example, how in the church, how the sermon would go, how would the songs come out, at home, how would dinner happen, who would be serving dinner, who'd be taking care of the grandfather, would the kids eat together, would the parents eat together first, kids eat separate, like just trying to figure out the order of things so it's as realistic as possible. And that's important to me also, just because it's interesting to me also. I want to know these things. When I was interviewing gang members for Sin Nombre, I'd ask the question like, well, who shopped for toothpaste? Like, I was just curious, like all the banal stuff that happens. Like I wanted to know how it worked, because that for me, there's more of a connection on like the mundane than there is in sort of like these sort of extreme sensational sort of facts. And I'm more interested in showing those connections that you wouldn't normally think of than sort of just trying to make people feel something out of like some sort of manipulation of an event. What I mean by that is like sensationalizing something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for interviewing with me today. It was a real honor to get to talk to you and talk about your art and share it with our viewers. So I appreciate it. And where can we see you? Where are you going next? Where should we follow you to keep up on your work?
God, I think next I might be going to 1890s New York.
Oh, wow.
Lower East Side. So I think that time is one of the most densely populated square miles on the planet, full of people from around the world. And adapting a novel from about 20 years ago called The Alienist, just about a serial killer in New York. So I'm working on all of it's going to be a miniseries, and I'm working on all the episodes as a writer, but I think I'm only going to direct the first couple episodes.
Oh, cool. Well, I can't wait to see that.
Yeah, so that should be fun. It'd be fun to recreate something from 107 years ago. Right up my alley.
I know, like the hardest, most challenging thing that you can do, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that is a big part of your art. You don't do anything that's easy, do you?
There's a part of me that really wants to do something easy, like in a really nice Caribbean island somewhere, a nice resort. But I don't think any good stories come out of those kind of places. You just get lazy, is what I mean. So for right now, I have the stamina.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you for your art and thanks for the interview.
Thanks, Heather, for inviting me.
Yeah. Okay. See you later. Bye.
Bye.